second grade. All right, we're gonna keep reading James and the Giant Peach. We're starting today on chapter 13. So, here we go. Miss Spider just made the beds for everybody on their first night all together in the Peach, all the insects and James. So, chapter 13. A few minutes later, Miss Spider had made the first bed. It was hanging from the ceiling, suspended by a rope of threads at either end, so it looked a little more like a hammock than a bed. It was a magnificent affair. The stuff that was made of shimmered like silk in the pale light. "I do hope you find it comfortable," Miss Spider said to the old green grasshopper. "I made it as soft and silky as I possibly could. I spun it with gossamer. That's a much better quality thread than the one I used for my own web." "Thank you so much, my dear lady," the old green grasshopper said, climbing into the hammock. "Ah, this is just what I needed. Good night, everybody. Good night." Then Miss Spider spun the next hammock, and the ladybug got in. After that, she spun a long one for the centipede, and an even longer one for the earthworm. "And how do you like your bed?" she said to James when it came to his turn. "Hard or soft?" "Oh, I think I like it soft, thank you very much," James answered. "For goodness sake, stop staring around the room. And get on with my boots," the centipede said to James. "You and I are never going to get any sleep at this rate. And kindly line them up neatly in pairs as you take them off. Just don't throw them over your shoulder." James worked very frantically at the centipede's boots. Each one had laces and had to be untied and loosened before it could be pulled off. And to make matters worse, all the laces were all tied up in the most complicated knots that had to be unpicked with his fingernails. It was just awful. It took about 2 hours, and by the time James had pulled off the last boot of all and had lined them up in a row on the floor, 21 pairs altogether, the centipede was fast asleep. "Wake up, centipede," whispered James, giving him a little gentle dig in the stomach. "It's time for bed." "Oh, thank you, my dear child," the centipede said, opening his eyes. Then he got down off the sofa and ambled across the room, kind of stumbled, and crawled into his hammock. James got into his own hammock, and oh, how soft and comfortable it was compared to the hard, bare boards that his aunts had always made him sleep upon at home. "Lights out," said the centipede drowsily. Nothing happened. "Turn out the light," he called, raising his voice. James glanced around the room, wondering which of the others he might be talking to, but they were all asleep. The old green grasshopper was snoring loudly through his nose. The ladybug was making whistling noises as she breathed, and the earthworm was coiled up like a spring at one end of the hammock, wheezing and blowing through his open mouth. As for Miss Spider, she had made a lovely web for herself across one corner of the room, and James could see her crouching right in the very center of it, mumbling softly in her dreams. "I said turn out the light," shouted the centipede angrily. James looked around. "Are you talking to me?" James asked him. "Of course I'm not talking to you, you fool," the centipede answered. "That crazy glowworm has gone to sleep with her light on." For the first time since entering the room, James glanced up at the ceiling, and there he saw a most extraordinary sight, something that looked like a gigantic fly without wings. It was at least 6 feet long and standing upside down upon its 6 legs in the middle of the ceiling. And the tail end of this creature seemed to be literally on fire. A brilliant greenish light, as bright as the brightest electric bulb, was shining out of its tail and lighting up the whole entire room. "Is that a glowworm?" asked James, staring at the light. "It doesn't look like a worm of any sort to me." "Of course it's a glowworm," the centipede answered. "At least that's what she calls herself. Although actually, you are quite right. She isn't really a worm at all. Glowworms are never really worms. They are simply lady fireflies without wings. Wake up, you lazy beast." But the glowworm did not stir, so the centipede reached out of his hammock, picked up one of his boots from the floor. "Put out that wretched light," he shouted, throwing the boot up at the ceiling. The glowworm slowly opened one eye and stared at the centipede. "There is no need to be rude," she said coldly, "all in good time." Come on, shouted the centipede, "or I'll put it out for you." "Oh, hello, James," the glowworm said, looking down and giving James a little wave and a smile. "I didn't see you come in. Welcome, my dear boy, welcome, and good night." Then click, out went the light. And here is a picture of some of them sleeping in their hammocks. There's the glowworm at the top, and there's James in his hammock down at the bottom. James Henry Trotter lay there in the darkness with his eyes open wide, listening to the strange sleeping noises that the creatures were all making around him, and wondering what on earth was going to happen to him in the morning. Already he was beginning to like his new friends very much. They were not nearly as terrible as they looked. In fact, they weren't really terrible at all. They seemed exactly kind and helpful in spite of the shouting and arguing that went on between them. "Good night, old green grasshopper," he whispered. "Good night, ladybug. Good night, Miss Spider." But before he could go through them all, he had fallen fast asleep. Chapter 14. "We're off!" someone was shouting. "We're off at last!" James woke up with a jump and looked about him. The creatures were all out of their hammocks and moving excitedly around the room. Suddenly, the floor gave a great heave, as though an earthquake were taking place. "Here we go," shouted the old green grasshopper, hopping up and down with excitement. "Hold on tight." "What's happening?" cried James, leaping out of his hammock. "What's going on?" The ladybug, who was obviously a kind and gentle creature, came over and stood beside him. "Well, in case you don't know it," she said, "we are about to depart forever from the top of this ghastly hill that we've all been living on for so long. We are all about to roll away inside of this great, big, beautiful peach to a land of what?" asked James. "Never you mind," said the ladybug, "but nothing could be worse than this desolate hilltop and these two repulsive aunts of yours." "Hear, hear," they all shouted. That's like, we agree, we agree. Hear, hear. "You may not have noticed it," the ladybug went on, "but the whole garden, even before it reaches the steep edge of the hill, happens to be on a very steep slope. And therefore, the only thing that has been stopping this peach from rolling away down from the beginning is the thick stem attaching it to the tree. Break the stem, and off we go." "Watch it," cried Miss Spider, as the room gave another violent lurch. "Here we go." Not quite, not quite. At this moment," continued the ladybug, "our centipede, who has a pair of jaws as sharp as razors, is up there on the top of the peach nibbling away at that stem. In fact, he must be nearly through it by now, as you can tell from the way we're lurching about. Would you like me to take you under my wing so that you won't fall over when we start rolling?" "Oh, that's very kind of you," said James, "but I think I'll be all right." Just then, the centipede stuck his grinning face through the hole in the ceiling and shouted, "I've done it! We're off!" "We're off!" the others cried. "We're off! The journey begins!" shouted the centipede. "And who knows where it will end," muttered the earthworm. "If you have anything to do with it, it can only mean trouble." "Nonsense," said the ladybug. "We are now about to visit the most marvelous places and see the most wonderful things. Isn't it so, centipede?" "Well, there is no knowing what we shall see," cried the centipede. "We may see a creature with 49 heads who lives in the desolate snow, and whenever he catches a cold, which he dreads, he has 49 noses to blow. We may see the venomous pink-spotted scrunch who can chew up a man with one bite. It likes to eat 5 of them roasted for lunch and 18 for its supper at night. We may see a dragon, and nobody knows that we won't see a unicorn there. We may see a terrible monster with toes growing out of the tufts of his hair. We may see a sweet little bitty bright hen, so playful, so kind and well-bred. And such beautiful eggs, you just boil them and then they explode and blow off your heads. A new rhinoceros surely you'll see, and that enormous and horrible gnat, whose sting when it stings you goes in at the knee and comes out through the end of your hat. We may even get lost and be frozen by frost. We may die in an earthquake or tremor. Or nastier still, we may even be tossed on the horns of a ferocious dilemma. But who cares? Let us go from this horrible hill. Let us roll, let us bowl, let us plunge. Let's go rolling and bowling and spinning until we're away from old Spiker and Sponge." 1 second later, slowly, insidiously, and oh, most gently, the great peach, that means kind of, it's getting a slow start. It's a very heavy peach by this point, started to lean forward and steal into motion. The whole room began to tilt over, and all the furniture went sliding across the floor and crashed against the far wall. So did James and the ladybug, and the old green grasshopper, and Miss Spider, and the earthworm, also the centipede, who had just come slithering quickly down the wall. Chapter 15. Outside in the garden at that very moment, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker had just taken their places at the front gate, each with the bunch of tickets in her hand, and the first stream of early morning sightseers was visible in the distance, climbing up the hill to view the peach. "We shall make a fortune today," Aunt Spiker was saying. "Just look at all those people." "I wonder what became of that horrid little boy of ours last night," Aunt Sponge said. "He never did come back in, did he?" "Oh, he probably fell down in the dark and broke his leg," Aunt Spiker said. "Or his neck, maybe," Aunt Sponge said hopefully. "Just wait till I get my hands on him," Aunt Spiker said, waving her cane. "He'll never want to stay out all night again by the time I've finished with him. Good gracious me, what was that awful noise?" Both women swung around to look. The noise, of course, had been caused by the giant peach crashing through the fence that surrounded it. And now, gathering speed every second, it came rolling across the garden toward the place where Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker were standing. They gaped, they screamed, they started to run, they panicked, they both got in each other's way. They began pushing and jostling, and each of them was thinking only of saving herself. Aunt Sponge, the fat one, tripped over a box that she'd brought along to keep the money in and fell flat on her face. Aunt Spiker immediately tripped over Aunt Sponge and came down on top of her. They both lay on the ground, fighting and clawing and yelling and struggling frantically to get up again. Before they could do this, the mighty peach was upon them. There was a crunch, And then there was silence. The Peach rolled on, and behind it, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker lay ironed out upon the grass, as flat and thin and lifeless as a couple of paper dolls cut out of a picture book. They are pancakes. The Peach has crushed them. Chapter 16. And now the Peach had broken out of the garden and was over the edge of the hill, rolling and bouncing down the steep slope at a terrific pace. Faster and faster and faster it went, and the crowds of people who were climbing up the hill suddenly caught sight of this terrible monster plunging down upon them, and they screamed and they scattered right and left as it went hurtling by. At the bottom of the hill, it charged across the road, knocking over a telegraph pole and flattening 2 parked automobiles as it went by. There they are before the Peach crushed them, standing and looking at it. At the bottom of the hill, automobiles. Then it rushed madly across 20 fields, breaking down all the fences and hedges in its path. A hedge is a bunch of bushes. It went right through the middle of the herd of fine Jersey cows, and then through a flock of sheep, and then through a paddock full of horses, and then through a yard full of pigs, and soon the whole countryside was a seething mass of panic-stricken animals stampeding in all directions. The Peach was still going at a tremendous speed with no sign of slowing down. And about a mile further on, it came to a village. Down the main street of the village it rolled, with people leaping frantically out of its path left and right. And at the end of the street, it went crashing down right through the wall of an enormous building and out the other side, leaving 2 gaping, humongous, wide-open holes through the brickwork. The building happened to be a famous factory where they made chocolate, and almost at once a great river of warm melted chocolate came pouring out of the holes in the factory wall. A minute later, this sticky brown mess was flowing through every street in the village, oozing under the doors of houses and into people's shops and gardens. Children were wading up to their knees. When you wade through something, you're kind of pushing, walking, but it's water, so it's kind of tough. And some were even trying to swim in it, and all of them were sucking it into their mouths in great greedy gulps and shrieking with joy. Could you imagine a river of melted chocolate pouring through the streets? But the Peach rushed on across the countryside, on and on and on, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake, like a tornado. Cowsheds, stables, pigsties, barns, bungalows, hayricks, anything that got in its way went toppling over like a 9-pin, like a bowling pin. An old man sitting quietly beside a stream had been fishing, and his fishing rod whisked out of his hand as it went dashing by, and a woman called Daisy Entwistle was standing so close to it as it passed, she had the skin taken right off the tip of her nose. Would it ever stop? Why should it? A round, spherical object will always keep on rolling as long as it's on a downhill slope, and in this case, the land sloped downhill all the way until it reached the ocean. The same ocean that James had begged his aunts to be allowed to visit just the day before. Well, perhaps he was going to visit it now. The Peach was rushing closer and closer and closer, and every second, and closer until the towering white cliffs that came first. These cliffs are the most famous in the whole of England, and they're hundreds of feet high. Below them, the sea is deep and cold and hungry. Many ships have been swallowed up and lost forever on this part of the coast, and all the men who were in them as well. The Peach was now only 100 yards away from the cliff, now 50, now 20, now 10, now 5. And when it reached the edge of the cliff, it seemed to leap up into the sky and hang there suspended for a few seconds, still turning over and over and over in the air. Then it began to fall. Down, 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 down. Smack! It hit the water with a colossal, enormous, humongous, gigantic splash and sank like a stone. Oh no, it must be very dense. But wait. A few seconds later, up it came again, and this time, up it stayed, floating serenely upon the surface of the water. So there it is, launching off the cliff, spinning in the air for a minute, down, 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 splash, sunk to the bottom, and then popped back up like a bobber. Chapter 17. At this moment, the scene inside the Peach itself was one of indescribable chaos, craziness. James Henry Trotter was lying bruised and battered on the floor of the room amongst a tangled mass of centipede and earthworm and spider and ladybug and glowworm and old green grasshopper. In the whole history of the world, no travelers had ever had a more terrible journey than these unfortunate creatures just have. It had started out well, with much laughing and shouting, and for the first few seconds as the Peach had begun to roll slowly forward, nobody had minded being toppled about a little bit. But then it went bump, and the centipede had shouted, "Was that Aunt Sponge?" And then bump again. That was Aunt Spiker. Then there had been a tremendous burst of cheering all around. But after that, as soon as the peach rolled out of the garden and began to go down the steep hill, rushing and plunging and bounding madly downward toward the ocean, the whole thing became a nightmare. James found himself being flung up against the ceiling, then back down to the floor, then sideways against the wall, then up to the ceiling again, and up and down and back and forth and round. And at the same time, all the other creatures were flying all through the air in every direction inside that peach. And so were the chairs and the sofa, not to mention the 42 boots belonging to the centipede. Everything and all of them were being rattled around like peas inside an enormous rattle. You know how a rattle goes when you shake it. That was being rattled by a mad giant who refused to stop. To make it worse, something went wrong with the glowworm's lighting system, and the room was in pitch blackness. All of this. There were screams and yells and curses and cries of pain, and everything kept going round and round, and once James made a frantic grab at some thick bars sticking out of the wall, only to find that they were a couple of the centipede's legs. Oh, dear me. So, let go, you fool, shouted the centipede, kicking himself free, and James was promptly flung across the room into the old green grasshopper's lap, which has horns. Ouch. Twice he got tangled up in Miss Spider's legs, a horrid business. And toward the end, the poor earthworm, who was cracking himself like a whip every time he flew through the air from one side of the room to the other, coiled himself around James's body just to hold on to something. Oh, it was a frantic and terrible trip, but it was all over now, and the room was suddenly very still and quiet. Everybody was beginning slowly and painfully to disentangle himself from everybody else. Imagine a huge knot. Let's have some light, shouted the centipede. Yes, let's, they cried. Please, light, give us some light. Oh, I'm trying, answered the poor glowworm. I'm doing my best. Please be patient. They all waited in silence. Then a faint greenish glow began to glimmer out of the glowworm's tail, and this gradually became stronger and stronger until it was anyway enough to see by. Some great journey, the centipede said, limping across the room. I shall never be the same again, said the earthworm. There they are, in a huge mess. Oh my goodness, piled up on the floor, and there's the glowworm trying her very best to provide a little bit of light for them inside the peach stone. Nor I, the ladybug said. It's taken years off my life. Oh, but my dear friends, cried the old green grasshopper, trying to be cheerful. We are there. Where? They asked. Where? Where is there? Well, I don't know, the old green grasshopper said, but I'll bet it's somewhere good. We are probably at the bottom of a coal mine, the earthworm said gloomily. We certainly went down and down and down and down very suddenly at the last moment. I feel it in my stomach. I still feel it. Perhaps we are in the middle of a beautiful country full of songs and music, the old green grasshopper said. Or near the seashore, said James eagerly, with lots of other children down on the sand for me to play with. Well, pardon me, murmured the ladybug, turning a trifle pale. Am I wrong in thinking that we seem to be bobbing up and down? Bobbing up and down, they cried. Whatever do you mean? What on earth? What are you talking about? Well, we're still giddy from the journey, the old green grasshopper told her. We're still happy. You'll get over that in a minute. Is everybody ready to go upstairs now and take a look around? Yes, yes, they chorused, they said all together. Come on, let's go. I refuse to show myself out of the doors of my bare feet, the centipede said. I have to get my boots on first. Oh, for heaven's sake, let's not go through all of that nonsense again, the earthworm said. Let's all lend the centipede a hand and get it over with, the ladybug said. Come on, everyone. So they did, all except Miss Spider, who had set about weaving a very long rope ladder that would reach from the floor up to the hole in the ceiling. The old green grasshopper had wisely said that they must not risk going out of the side entrance when they didn't know where they were. But they must first go up to the top of the peach and have a look around. So half an hour later, when the rope ladder had been finished and hung, and the 42nd boot had been laced neatly onto the centipede's 42nd foot, they were ready to go outside. Here we go. Amidst mounting and excitement and shouts of, here we go, boys, the promised land. I can't wait to see it. The whole company shouted, climbed up the ladder, one by one, and disappeared into the dark, soggy tunnel at the ceiling and went steeply, almost vertically upward. We know what vertical means. Vertical means straight up and down. I'm going to do one more quick chapter for you. Chapter 18. A minute later, they were out in the open, standing on the very top of the peach, near the stem, blinking their eyes in the strong sunlight and peering nervously around. What happened? Where are we? But this is impossible, unbelievable, terrible. Oh, I told you we were bobbing up and down, the ladybug said. We're in the middle of the sea, cried James. And indeed they were. A strong current and a high wind had carried the peach so quickly away from the shore that already the land was almost out of sight. All around them lay vast black ocean, deep and hungry. Little waves were bibbling up against the sides of the Peach. How did this happen, they cried. Where are all the fields? Where are the woods? Where is England? Nobody, not even James, could understand how in the world a thing like this could have come about. Ladies and gentlemen, the old green grasshopper said, trying very hard to keep the fear and disappointment out of his voice, I am afraid that we find ourselves in a rather awkward situation. Awkward, cried the earthworm. My dear old green grasshopper, we are finished. Every one of us knows that we are about to perish. Perish means die, be gone forever. I may be blind, you know, but I can see as much to know quite clearly that we are doomed. Off with my boots, shouted the centipede. I cannot swim with my boots on. I can't swim at all, cried the ladybug. Nor can I, said the glowworm. Nor I, said Miss Spider. None of us 3 girls can swim a single stroke. But you won't have to swim, said James calmly. We are floating beautifully. And sooner or later, a ship is bound to come along and pick us up. They all stared at him in amazement. Are you quite sure that we are not sinking? The ladybug asked. Well, of course I'm sure, answered James. Go and look for yourselves. They all ran over to the side of the Peach and peered down at the water below. The boy is quite right, said old green grasshopper. We are floating beautifully. Now we must all sit down and keep perfectly calm. Everything will be all right in the end. What absolute nonsense, cried the earthworm. Nothing is ever all right in the end. And well you know it, poor earthworm, the ladybug said, whispering in James's ear. He loves to make everything into a disaster. He hates to be happy. He is only happy when he is gloomy. Now, isn't that odd? But then I suppose just being an earthworm is enough to make any person pretty gloomy. Don't you agree? Well, if this Peach is not going to sink, the earthworm was saying, and if we are not going to be drowned, then every one of us is going to starve to death instead. Do you realize that we haven't had anything to eat since yesterday morning? Oh, by golly, he's right, cried the centipede. For once, Earthworm is actually right. Well, of course I'm right, the earthworm said. And we're not likely to find anything around here either. We shall get thinner and thinner and thirstier, and we shall die a slow and grisly death from starvation. I am dying already, I'm sure of it. I am slowly shriveling up for want of food. Personally, I would rather drown. But good heavens, you must be blind, said James. You know very well I'm blind, snapped the earthworm. There's no need to rub it in. Well, I didn't mean that, said James quickly. I'm sorry, but can't you see that? See, shouted the poor earthworm. How can I see if I'm blind? James took a deep breath, a slow breath. Can't you realize, he said patiently, that we have enough food here to last us weeks and weeks? Where? They said. Where? We're all going to starve. Why, the Peach, of course. Our whole ship is made of food. Jumping Jehoshaphat, they cried. We never thought of that. My dear James, said the old green grasshopper, laying a front leg affectionately on James's shoulder. I didn't know what we would do without you. You are so clever. Ladies and gentlemen, we are saved again. We are most certainly not, said the earthworm. You must be crazy. You can't eat the ship. That's the only thing that's keeping us up. Well, we shall starve if we don't, said the centipede. And we shall drown if we do, cried the earthworm. Oh dear, said the old green grasshopper. Now we're worse off than before. Couldn't we just eat a little bit of it, asked Miss Spider. I'm so dreadfully hungry. You can eat all you want, James answered. It would take us weeks and weeks and make any sort of dent. It would not make any sort of dent in this enormous Peach. Surely you can see that. Good heavens, he's right again, cried the old green grasshopper, clapping his hands. It would take weeks and weeks. Of course it would. But let's not go making a lot of holes all over the deck. I think we'd better simply scoop it out of that tunnel over there, the one we've just come by. An excellent idea, said the ladybug. What are you looking so worried about, earthworm? The centipede asked. What's the problem? Well, the problem is, the earthworm said. The problem is there is no problem. Everyone burst out laughing. Cheer up, earthworm, they said. Come and eat. And they all went over to the tunnel entrance and began scooping out great chunks of juicy, golden-colored peach flesh. Oh, marvelous, said the centipede, stuffing it into his mouth. Delicious, said the old green grasshopper. Just fabulous, said the glowworm. Oh my, said the ladybug primly. What a heavenly taste. She looked up at James, and she smiled, and James smiled back at her. They sat down on the deck together, some of them chewing away happily. You know, James, the ladybug said, up until this moment, I have never in my life tasted anything except those tiny little green flies that live on rose bushes. They have a perfectly delightful flavor, but this peach is ever better. Isn't it glorious, Miss Spider said, coming over to join them. Personally, I had always thought that a big, juicy, caught-in-the-web blue bottle was the finest dinner in the world until I tasted this. What a flavor, the centipede cried. It's terrific. There's nothing like it. there has never been. And I should know, because I personally have tasted all the finest foods in the world. Whereupon the centipede, with his mouth full of peach and with juice running down all over his chin, suddenly burst into a song. Whoops. Everybody was feeling very happy now. And there's the centipede eating his piece of the peach. Everybody was feeling happy now. The sun was shining brightly out of the soft blue sky, and the day was calm. The giant peach, with the sunlight glinting on its side, was like a massive golden ball sailing upon a silver sea. All right, we're going to stop there. And next week, we're going to start on chapter 19. Have a great day.